All of these discoveries are done by people. It all started when curious young students decided to become scientists. And we need more. We realized this long ago. There is talent and passion for science everywhere. We connect curious students with passionate young scientists. Now we are all together as Science Clubs International. Our common language is STEM. Our mission is to spark a social transformation by expanding access to high-quality STEM education and international scientific networks. We are growing. Empowering youth with science.
Hi everyone, and welcome to this webinar, Freshwater, Lifeblood of Our Planet, with Kari Vigerstol. Let me talk a little bit about Kari. Kari is the Director of the Water Security Science and Innovation for the Nature Conservancy's Global Water Program, strategically strengthening and advancing the science behind the Conservancy's source water protection and water scarcity strategies. Over the last 19 years, Kari has brought her technical skills and partnership building experience to dozens of watersheds around the world towards protecting water resources and improving water use and management. So let's give the talk to Kari, and we start this webinar. Only let me show the next event that we have in the SCI, our social media, and we start this webinar with Kari.
Thank you so much. So let me just share my presentation. Happy to be with you all here today and excited to talk about water, which is something that I'm really excited about, as you'll see. So as mentioned, I work for the Nature Conservancy, which is a global conservation nonprofit focusing on protecting the lands and waters on which all life depends. And at the Nature Conservancy, I'm the Director of Science for our water security work, which means I lead a team of scientists who do work on ensuring we have enough clean, reliable water for the foreseeable future in places around the globe. So today I'm going to talk to you about why I think freshwater science is one of the most important realms of work that you could think about going into, and also give you an inside look as to what it looks like to be a freshwater scientist. So let's get started. So I first wanted to begin by answering the question, why did I decide to focus on freshwater, and why do I think it's an important issue to focus on, or an important area of science work to focus on? So I'm just going to quickly go through sort of some reasons behind this. So at the most basic level, water is obviously essential for our survival. We can't survive more than a couple of days without water to drink. And so for me, when I think about having a big impact on the world, I feel like being able to support making sure that everybody has clean water for their survival, for the most basic things that we need in order to then go do all the other amazing things that people do. I think to me that's super exciting to be a part of that. Water also is important for keeping us clean and healthy, for washing clothes, but also washing our hands and other kinds of cleanliness. So for example, during the height of the COVID pandemic, there was some focus on areas where people don't have access to clean water, and the challenge that presented in ensuring protection from transmission of COVID. Water is also super important for feeding us. So agriculture actually is the biggest water user across the globe. Water is needed whether crops are irrigated or they depend on rainwater for crops. It's a really important component of growing crops and then feeding into the rest of our food supply chain. So water is critical, to address being able to support and feed all of us on this planet. And water provides energy. So water can provide energy directly through hydropower, for example, or even through many of the other sources of energy that we use. Water is an essential component as part of providing that energy to us. So when we think about how we use and manage water, we need to think about all these different components: having water to drink, water for agriculture, water for energy, and also water for our ecosystems. So let's get to the next slide. Let's talk about that a little bit. So one of the other reasons that I'm really excited to work on water and why I enjoy working on freshwater is because water connects us. It's an issue that brings people together across political lines, across boundaries between states and countries, across different religions, people and people's different kinds of work, or how people spend their time. The one thing that we all need is water. And so it really connects us to one another within a certain area. So this is a picture of a watershed, which is basically a place where all the water drains to the same outlet point. And all the people and animals within this watershed are all connected by the water they rely on. So from the water falling from the sky in terms of rain, fog, snow, and the way that water runs across the landscape, different people and even animals are impacting that water as it flows across the landscape. And for example, a city downstream may depend on what's happening from farmers upstream. And so I really love that connection point that brings people together. And so, as I mentioned, there are a lot of human uses for water, but also our ecosystems, our freshwater ecosystems, depend on clean, reliable supply of water for their survival. So, and it's really critical, even more so because of the decline in freshwater biodiversity over the last a number of decades. In fact, freshwater ecosystems have declined at a much faster rate than terrestrial ecosystems or those in the ocean. So it's really critical not only for people, but also for freshwater species to learn about how we can better support these systems, and science is a really important component of that. So beyond these really tangible uses of water that I think we're all aware of, there's also this value of water beyond these tangible uses, which includes spiritual or religious values. It's something that creates calm for people in some situations. Looking out over a lake or a river, it can be embedded in memories of places and experiences, and can be used is used in many religious rituals. So there's also this kind of intangible value of water that I think is really important. And finally, personally, water is a really joyful thing for me. I love being in water, and I learned to swim at a really young age, and I still love swimming. Here in Seattle, where I live, we are really lucky to have some freshwater lakes right in the city, which used to be polluted, but now are clean enough for us to swim in. So I can be working downtown, and then I can go for a swim after work. And I really just enjoy that feeling of being in the water, and I'm really appreciative of having these clean bodies of water that I can enjoy. And earlier this year, I had my first child. And I was really excited to introduce him to swimming. And I was super fun this summer to see the joy in his face being in water with me and swimming around. So there's also this personal connection I have beyond all of these tangible uses, and even that spiritual connection people have. I have this personal connection where I feel joyful thinking and working on water, thinking about and working on water. So just to lay the groundwork of sort of why I think water is important and why personally I work on freshwater. So I'm going to transition from this sort of really joyful picture about freshwater and the importance of it, and shift to, well, what's going on and what are the things that we work on, and why is this great need to work on water? So we start with the idea of water quantity or water supply. they're painting a really dire picture of our current and future situation around water scarcity. So this study that was done at the Water Resources Group looked at the overall balance of water globally. How much water do we have available across the whole globe? And I'm talking about just fresh water. So not talking about the water that's in the oceans that we can't drink, but actually fresh water that's in lakes and rivers, that's underground in aquifers, in wetlands and other natural water bodies. How much water is available for use, and then how much demand is there for water, and what does that balance look like globally? So when we look at that water availability compared to demand from agriculture, as I mentioned, agriculture is a really big water user, from industry and for municipal or domestic use, or use by people, for all those for drinking, washing, and other uses. There is already sort of an imbalance between that global demand for water and the available supply. And looking ahead, we think about increased population and improvements in economies actually can increase demand for water as people are eating more meat, as people want to buy more products, use more energy. That takes more water. So when we look at the overall balance, looking out to 2030, there's a deficit between the demand for water and the available supply. And this does not even take into account the environmental needs. So it doesn't take into account how much water is needed in a lake or river to meet the needs of those freshwater ecosystems. So there's a big challenge around water quantity globally. But an important point on this is that that balance was sort of done at that whole global level. Water is very localized. So even though we have this challenge globally, there are some parts of the globe that have lots of water and are not experiencing this scarcity. But there are other parts of the globe that are feeling it even more intensely. So this map is looking at that kind of balance between availability and demand at the basin scale, at sort of the localized scale. And you can see that some areas of the globe have serious problems around water scarcity, while other areas of the globe, as I mentioned, are not experiencing that as deeply. But what's really interesting, if we look at those basins or watershed, as I described, sort of the area that all the water runs to the same place, we can see that while only 15% of these basins are water scarce, these basins contain half of cities over 100,000 people. So half of this sort of large cities around the world are in basins that are water scarce, and that's not a surprise. These cities were established and started using water. There's agriculture in those basins that are feeding some of those cities, but it's just I think it's a really important thing to note that there is an outsized impact on the places where people are living. And as you know, this world is becoming more and more urbanized. People are moving to cities, and so this problem is going to become even more important. Let's take another look at this sort of the future watershed. So that was the current picture. This map is from a really cool online tool from the World Resources Institute called Aqueduct. I encourage you to go check it out. There are all kinds of ways you can play around with current and future water projections and get a picture of the situation of water scarcity and water quality in different basins. And you can zoom into these different places. So you can look at where you live and what the data says about the water challenges there. And again, just wanted to point out that that sort of localized nature of water, that there are certain places across the globe that by 2030 are expected to be in high or extremely high water stress. And you can see that picture is that area of land is a little bit bigger than it was, in current situation. But then again, there are other places that will not experience this as deeply. And just wanted to say that this data is based on sort of that biophysical data of precipitation or water supply versus demand. And that in many of these places, the other factor that comes into account is the management of that water. So, for example, in the Western U.S., you can see that there's a lot of water stress predicted, and currently there is a drought that's being experienced. But one of the ways that we can manage against those drought are through management actions, through infrastructure, or really strong water allocation laws that make sure that people are getting the water they need. So So these kinds of maps are looking at that, so that physical balance between the demand and supply, but the way that we manage our water can have a really big impact on how that stress is felt. So just wanted to point that out as something to think about. And that's where, as freshwater scientists, can play a role in helping provide the data and information needed to make the right management decisions. And just one more slide on this to keep painting this entire picture. This is looking at really big cities. These are cities with populations bigger than 3 million. And this was a recent New York Times article looking at which of those cities would fall into extremely high or low stress around water. And as you can see, more than a third of major urban areas, more than 3 million people, are under high or extremely high water stress. And they've called out a few of these cities, including Mexico City, Los Angeles, Chennai, New Delhi, Sao Paulo, and others. So this is the picture around water quantity, water scarcity. Sorry. So on the other side of the coin, sorry, get this to go forward. Okay, on the other side of the, sorry about that delay. On the other side of the coin, we see there are also lots of instances of too much water. So at certain times of year, when rainfall happens a lot of rainfall happens in a short time, obviously there can be problems around flooding. And we see this in all kinds of areas around the globe. And we do see it increasing as precipitation gets more intense with climate change, because it have huge impacts on infrastructure and on people's lives, and can definitely put people's lives at risk. And so this is another consideration when we think about water management and being able to provide data and information to help predict these kinds of events and manage for them to reduce those impacts on people. And then I'll switch gears just a little bit to talk about the water quality side of freshwater, and focusing in here on water pollution. So even if we had all the water we could ask for, it's of limited use to people and to ecosystems if it's polluted, because we just can't use it. If it's too dirty, if it's going to make people sick, it's almost like another form of water scarcity. So water pollution is a challenge everywhere around the world, although the nature of this challenge differs from place to place due to a number of factors. And there's different kinds of pollution. There's point source pollution, which comes from, for example, a pipe like you're seeing there on the bottom right, which can come from like unregulated or unenforced industry. Could be trash from inadequate solid waste disposal systems. No matter what sort of the source of the pollution is, the impacts of these sources continue to degrade the ability of our water resources to be used safely for drinking, for swimming, for washing, for fishing. For example, in China, not even half of the surface water sources meet water quality standards for use that that area is zoned for. And there are many other examples around the globe on that. And even in places that pride themselves on really tough point source water pollution regulations, so places like Europe, like Australia, like the US, they still face non-point source pollution problems, which are caused by pollutants that are sitting on the landscape, and when it rains, they run off the landscapes and end up in our waterways. And agriculture is a huge contributor to this non-point source pollution, particularly from the fertilizers they use to help crops grow in the form of nitrogen and phosphorus, which end up in the rivers, in lakes, and in many cases eventually end up in sort of the near shore marine areas. So you can see on the top, that's the Mississippi River coming out into the Gulf of Mexico. You can see the Yangtze River and the Pearl River. So there's this area which we call a hypoxic zone that occurs because of the non-point source pollution that runs off the river and ends up in the ocean. And what happens is there's algal growth, so algae grows, and it depletes the oxygen in this area and has a big impact, as you can imagine, on the ecosystems there. So on shrimp and fish that live in these places. So even in these places, in countries, areas where we have a pretty good handle on the point source pollution because of regulations that have been in place since, in the US case, since the late 60s, we still are really struggling with the non-point source pollution, which is much harder to control and regulate. And I alluded to this just briefly, but obviously climate change creates even bigger impacts in a lot of these areas. So it's been said if climate change is a shark, then water is its teeth. So meaning that many of the ways that people will experience the impacts of climate change are through water-related events. So as you know, across the globe, there's been predictions around, and some of this is already happening, less precipitation overall and higher temperatures, which reduces the amount of water available, both because there's just less precipitation coming into the system, but also the higher temperatures increase the demand for water. So crops need more water, people need more water when there's a higher temperatures. At the same time, there's been predictions around more intense rain events. So when it does rain, that rain happening in a shorter period and more intensely, which has problems around flooding, increases the risks of flooding, and also landslides and erosion coming off the landscape. And then another related climate change impact is around the increase in frequency and intensity of fires. And we see this happening already in many places. Here in Seattle today, I woke up to smoke in the air from fires that are happening elsewhere in our state. And this has become a regular thing over the last few summers. And I know this is happening in a lot of places. And the relation to water is that as these forest fires happen, when they're followed by rain events, the ash and the sediment that occur after the fires can wash off the landscape and can impact the waterways downstream. So an example of this is in New Mexico. About a decade or so ago, they had some really big forest fires, and following that, they had a rain event, and the resulting sediment and ash that ended up in their river meant that they had to shut down their water system for 2 weeks. And so there's a real risk to our water supply systems from this increase in forest fire. So that's just another example of a climate change impact where these risks are increasing and have an impact on our water systems. And in addition to these biophysical impacts or challenges around water, there are also a whole variety of social, political, and economic challenges. And I'm just listing a few here. There's a whole variety of additional ones. One is around water and sanitation access. Although we've made a lot of progress in bringing more water to people and more sanitation, improved sanitation to different areas of the world, there are still millions of people that have inadequate access to water and sanitation. And there's a lot of need to continue to work on this. Governance is a really important challenge and solution in many cases. So governance can make a big impact, as I mentioned, on how we use the water resources we have and how those resources are equitably distributed across different groups of people and the environment. So, for example, in a lot of places, there are no rules or regulations around the use of groundwater. Even here in the U.S. and I know in other developed countries, there's a lack of regulation around groundwater. So people are using groundwater as much as they want, and that's causing the groundwater to drop. And in some cases, that's land subsidence. In other cases, it increases the cost of getting groundwater because it just keeps getting lower and lower. You need more energy for pumping. And so slowly there are places that are implementing more rules around groundwater, but in the meantime, there's a huge impact on groundwater. So that's just one example of governance where when it's in place, it can do a really good job in helping make the best use of our resources, but when it's not, it can cause additional problems. Another example is transboundary waters, where water is shared across national boundaries. And the challenges around this when different countries have different regulations, they have different availability of data, there's conflict over who owns the water. So this is another challenge that is definitely relevant for a lot of, for example, river basins around the world, like the Nile River, like the Rio Bravo between the US and Mexico, and other transboundary rivers and lakes. So I hope I haven't brought the mood down too much. I just wanted to paint the picture of the challenge that's out there around the different aspects of our water resources and fresh water. Both, making sure we have enough water for people and managing it the right way in light of climate change, but also our freshwater ecosystems. So there's a lot of work to do. And so I'm going to shift gears now to talk about some of the areas of freshwater science that are out there that start to get at addressing some of these challenges. So here I just included a list of different kinds of freshwater science that you might think about. And I'll call out a few of them. This is not exhaustive, of course. There's lots of other areas of freshwater science that can apply to addressing some of these challenges, but I wanted to at least give you some of the ones that are top of mind for me. So just going down the list, for example, water chemistry is a really important area. When we're thinking about water quality, understanding what's going on in the water, is the water safe to drink? What do we need to do to treat the water to make it safe to drink? So water chemistry is super important. I'll talk a little bit about hydrology in a moment. Data collection is really critical so that we understand what's going on in our water systems. So being able to, for example, track water flow in a river and see how that's changing over time, so that we can better predict what might happen in the future. Or data collection around water quality, making sure that it's safe, water bodies are safe for different uses. Modeling is super important, all kinds of computer modeling of our freshwater systems to help us plan and manage and track what's going on. Freshwater ecology, looking at what is the state of our freshwater ecosystems and how we better manage those to support different species. Geomorphology is the study of how sediment moves through the river and kind of the shape of rivers over time, which can have big impacts on flooding. It can have impacts on freshwater ecosystems and other outcomes. Hydraulics is looking at how much water is in a river, sort of the flow within the channel of a river, again, which is super important for managing for floods. Water supply engineers can plan for water supply for a community, for cities. Also design water treatment systems. There's a whole variety of work that water supply engineers can do. Technology covers a lot of different aspects, and I'll give a couple of examples of those in a moment. And also social sciences. And I know this is a really big bucket, so apologies for putting it all in one place, but that includes thinking about even political science, economics, social sciences. So even if you have all of these other kinds of sciences, all of this data, technology, if you don't understand how to change people's behaviors or how to connect with people on managing water together, then you're not going to make the progress you need to make. So social science is just as important as a lot of these biophysical sciences for helping to address our global water challenges. So let me just hit on a couple of these in just slightly more detail. So I chose hydrology as one of the topics to cover because this is what really set me on the path of becoming a freshwater scientist. I took a hydrology class in my undergrad and got really excited. I really liked being able to predict, river flows based on precipitation and understand how water was moving across the landscape. So hydrologists basically look at and model, based on the precipitation that's happening or predicted to happen, what is the timing and locations of flows across the landscape and in our rivers. And so this is really important to help understand, what flood flows might look like, across even an urban landscape, but also within the water bodies that we're concerned about. So hydrology is one aspect of freshwater science that you might be interested in getting involved in. Another area of freshwater science is around fisheries. So understanding, for example, on the right is a life cycle of a salmon, the life cycle of fish, and what that means for management of our waterways to help support fisheries, because fisheries are a really important source of protein for many areas around the world, and important part of our economy, and making sure that we understand the ecosystems that these fish live in and can support being able to create sort of sustainable fisheries. Also in this bucket, there's aquaculture, which is growing in terms of a way to support sustainable fisheries. There are both good and bad things about aquaculture and ways you can do it really well and not so well. But that's another area that I think is growing and kind of fits under this fisheries bucket. And then the third one I want to mention is water technology. And this can cover a lot of different areas of technology. I'm just mentioning two specific examples here, but I think there's a lot of room for technology to help address some of the challenges that I mentioned earlier. So on the left is a solar-powered desalination plant. So desalination is one way to help address water scarcity in certain places where you take water from salt water from the ocean or saltwater lakes, other places, and then take out the salt to make fresh water. And to me, it's sort of a last resort. I think it's better to conserve water, to find other ways to better manage our water. But in some places where they're kind of reaching their last resort, desalination can offer a really good solution. But the problem is it's really energy intensive. So it's both costly and also, there's all of the negative impacts of using energy. So being able to use renewable energy such as solar in place where you're doing the desalination is really exciting. And just recently, the last couple of years, they've come a long way in developing this technology. So I think that's really exciting. On the right side is a precision irrigation system developed by a company out of Israel. Israel is definitely leading the way on sustainable irrigation. And this is really important to make sure we're using water efficiently to grow the food that we need. As I mentioned, agriculture is a huge user of water. And so if we can figure out ways to make it more efficient, that can really help us meet all of our food needs and manage our water better. So those are just two examples of how technology can help us address some of our water challenges. And before I move on to the next section of my talk, I just wanted to touch on this idea of the complexity of freshwater. I think, I mentioned some really specific categories of freshwater science, but within any of those, it's very rare that you would just be working sort of in a silo, just on your topic, like in a lab doing water chemistry. You could be, but in most cases, as a freshwater scientist, you end up needing to engage with many types of experts. So for example, if you're collecting data, if you're a hydrologist or focused on monitoring of waterways, you need to be able to take those data and communicate them to decision makers or to work with communities on water management based on those data. So I think it's really important, and it's one of the parts of my job that I really enjoy is, being able to do the science, but then using that to engage with a whole variety of other kinds of experts where we can work together to address those challenges. So I think that's an exciting part about working on freshwater science. It really helps to be a systems thinker. So what I mean by that is just that you're kind of think about things from the system view. One example of that is thinking about our water management from that watershed or basin view, that you're not just looking at one part of it, this stream and this fish in the stream, but really you're thinking about all of these different water uses, what are the regulations in this watershed, what are other kinds of science that's happening, for example, water technology, how can that help us with this stream and this fish? So I think being able to think about things in a systems level is really helpful. Communication skills are really important to influencing people and creating real change. So I think it really pays off to be strong in that science foundation, but also be able to communicate your science to other people. And then finally, we've been working on managing our water resources for centuries. And we can learn a lot from local communities and indigenous peoples who really know their local water systems really well and have solutions that they've been offering for a long time. So it's really important to learn from the past. We've had a lot of really good science and information about freshwater and how to manage it, but also given climate change and all these other changes, population, all kinds of other changes that are happening, there's a lot of uncertainty in the future. So we can't always use the past to predict the future. We used to, when I was in school, the idea was we use past water flows to predict future water flows because chances are it's going to look the same. But with climate change now, that's really different. So you have to be comfortable in operating in sort of with the uncertainty, and so that's an important part of being a freshwater scientist these days. Okay, so now I'm going to shift gears to focus on sort of my journey in freshwater science. I think it's always helpful. I think I've found it helpful to see how other people have moved through their careers and what that picture looks like to get ideas for myself. So hopefully this is helpful for you all. So just really quickly, my really specific journey in terms of education and jobs within this realm. So I started. I kind of knew I wanted to work in the environment ever since I was a little kid. I organized like cleanups in my neighborhood, painted storm drains to say, don't dump this water drains to the ocean, things like that. So when I went to college, I decided to work in the environment, but I also felt it was very practical. My dad was an engineer, and so he influenced me to go into engineering. So I ended up doing a degree in civil and environmental engineering at Rice University in Houston. Which was great. And that's where I loved my undergraduate education and was introduced to, as I mentioned, hydrology and water resources. And so that set me on my path of getting involved in freshwater. I then spent the next year volunteering as a community organizer around freshwater. So I organized cleanups of river basins. I invited politicians and the media so we can communicate about these problems. I educated students on water issues, and I also work with college students on testing waterways to see what their water quality was. So that was a really informative year in terms of these different issues and really getting my hands dirty in freshwater. But it also inspired me to want to do more, and so I went back to school and came here to Seattle to the University of Washington to get my master's in civil and environmental engineering. And I focused on water resource planning and management, which I thought, to me, that kind of combined sort of what I was really interested in and the skills that I had. And I was really lucky to work on an exciting project with a professor on the Rio Bravo in Mexico, working with the National Water Commission on how to manage for drought. I built a computer model on to help them manage drought, and it was just really exciting work and set me on my way to wanting to work internationally on water resource issues. After that, I was really lucky to get a fellowship to go to Norway for a couple of years, and I worked for a consulting company there as a water resource engineer. Worked on projects within Norway, and also they had projects in Africa and Asia. And so I got to work on those, which was really fantastic. And then I came back to Seattle and I worked for a few years at an engineering company here where I was doing modeling, data collection analysis around different water resources in this area. And I actually had applied to get a PhD in hydrology. Was accepted, but then I saw this job at the Nature Conservancy. So I kind of had my eyes open in terms of other opportunities. And they really needed a freshwater scientist who had experience in doing modeling of water systems. And so I jumped at the opportunity. The Nature Conservancy was an organization that I had been really interested in, but I never thought there was a space for an engineer at a conservation organization. But they had this need and I had the skills. And so that was really exciting that I kind of got a step into this place at this organization. And that was 14 years ago. So I've now been here at this organization, Nature Conservancy, for 14 years. I've got to change roles over time. I've gotten involved in different kinds of freshwater science. And I also progressed in my career. So now I lead a small team of scientists who work on these kind of issues. So that's my journey so far. We'll see where I go from here. But I really liked having the strong foundation of an engineering or science degree. But then over time, I've been spending more of my time on sort of the project management, on creating partnerships, on communication. So all these other things that are really important to creating change in the world, but I think wouldn't have been possible without this really strong foundation of science and engineering. So I think it's a really good way to start in the direction of trying to create change is having that strong foundation of understanding. Okay, I want to make sure we have time for questions. So I have a couple of examples of my current work I just wanted to share so you can get sort of tangibly, like, what do I do every day and what do the projects look like? But I'll go a little bit a little bit quickly through here in case we have any questions. So the first kind of project I wanted to share with you about are called water funds. And basically, these are platforms that are created to bring people together. So we call them collective action platforms to organize around protecting or restoring the places where water comes from. So the places in the watershed that I showed you, the kind of basin where precipitation falls and it moves through the landscape, maybe starts off in the mountains or hills, the higher parts of the watershed, and move through the watershed to a place where people get water from. And it's really important to invest in those places to make sure that we have clean water, we have a reliable source of water. So these water funds bring people together, to bring together different water users. So for example, utilities like city water suppliers, businesses, agriculture, and local government. And they pool their resources to invest in ecosystem protection, management, invest in upstream communities within the places where their water comes from. And so we do this through a foundation of science, because we need to understand what's going on in the basin, where is the water coming from, what's happening as it moves through the basin, what challenges are happening in the basin. But there also are important components of governance. So creating a really good structure for people to have good discussions, to do planning, to carry out that planning. And there's definitely an element of the financing, the kind of the movement of the money. So in this case, you can see there's a downstream city, and the city is puts money into, so cash or technical assistance or materials are invested in the upper watershed, and in return, there's a maintaining or improving of the water quality, for example, for the city, which saves them money in the long run in terms of water treatment costs. So there's a benefit to the downstream users by investing in the upstream watershed. So we started with our first water fund in Ecuador in the year 2000, and now we have more than 40 water funds around the world. There are a lot in Latin America, there's some in North America, just starting in Europe. In Africa, we have quite a few, and a couple of other places like New Zealand, we've started some, in China. And so it's been really exciting to see how we took this model and took it and put it into place in really different places, really different like biophysical contexts and political contexts. But the general model of sort of that investment in the watershed is the same in all places that we work on this. So one quick example of this, of a water fund, is in the Rio Grande in New Mexico, where, as I mentioned, there's a big risk of forest fires, and that potential risk to the water supply system, which is a very real risk. As I mentioned, the water supply system was shut down for several weeks a few years ago. And so we invest, along with, I think there are dozens of partners that are part of this water fund, in better management of the forest to avoid catastrophic forest fires. And in doing so, we're maintaining healthier forests for the forest ecosystems. It helps healthy forests help capture more snow in the winter. It also helps in the forest habitat, but also the freshwater habitat downstream. There's an economic benefit with the creating jobs for this through this program, and supplying a supply of trees that come from forest thinning can be used for other purposes. And in return, the city reduces their risk of having to shut down their water system. And there are other beneficiaries, such as communities using the waterways for other uses. So for example, here they talk about the recreation community has a reduced risk and maintained flows for their benefit. So that's just one example of a water fund. As I mentioned, there are dozens more around the world. Yeah, you can always look at our website and learn more about these different programs. So let me just shift gears in terms of projects to another body of work that I work on. And that's with it's corporate water stewardship, which is basically working with big companies. So companies that have facilities or production around the world. And we work on reducing their water-related risks. And the reason we do this is because, our mission is to cure water for people and nature. But there's an overlap between our desire to have healthy, reliable water and corporations wanting to reduce their water risks. And so we can do this, for example, through partnerships around improved water efficiency, land management improvements, investment in green and great infrastructure, so investment in the watersheds. And this work is really exciting because of the global reach of these corporations. So, for example, we work with Coca-Cola and other food and beverage companies that touch down on a lot of places, both in where they produce their drinks or food, but also in all the places where they source the ingredients for their products. And as I mentioned, agriculture has a huge impact on our water system. So there's an opportunity to work with these companies through their supply chains on improving management of water. So corporations face a number of risks, both physical, regulatory, and reputational risks that can impact their ability to operate into the future. So all of these play into how they work on water and why they invest in projects that improve management of water around the world. So as I mentioned, one of the reasons we work with companies is because of their impacts on the agricultural supply chain. So as I mentioned, agriculture is responsible for about 3/4 of the world's water withdrawals and actually 92% of water consumption. So the water that's lost and not returned to the system. And this will continue, as we need to produce more food for a growing population, this stress on our water systems from agriculture will continue. And so if we want to work on addressing the most important water issues around the world, or water scarcity, water quality issues, we need to really focus on agriculture. And we've learned that 2/3 of agricultural products go into corporate supply chains. So if we want to work on influencing this sector, it's a really powerful lever to work with the corporations. So we end up working with corporate partners on a lot of these issues, and the footprint of their from the combination of all of these companies is actually quite big. So there's a lot of potential to do really good work in a lot of different areas with companies. And so what we work with companies on are helping them understand their risks and where that overlaps with challenges to freshwater ecosystems. We help set standards and help companies go after setting global and local targets for water stewardship, which helps them sort of say what they're going to do and really stick to that, which is really important. And we help build partnerships, so with companies, but also other actors in a given basin. We provide guidance to companies on investments in nature, and a lot of those investments are also with projects that we're working on. So the Nature Conservancy has a really big footprint of projects, of water stewardship projects, of like the water funds, and so the companies will invest in those projects as part of their water stewardship work. And then also we help guide companies on tracking impacts of projects to make sure that what they're investing in is actually creating benefits for ecosystems, for people, and helping to reduce water risks. So those are just some of the ways we work with companies. A lot of other things that we do, but it is one part of my work is collaborating with companies on addressing water challenges. And then the last thing I'll talk about are some science tools that we've created over the last year or so. So this is a fun part of my job, is working with both internal and external partners. So this first project we work with another organization on, and this is providing an online tool for companies to look at different kinds of projects and what the benefits of those projects might be. So for example, they can use this tool to explore restoring wetlands and look at what are all the benefits that wetlands can provide. So if they're going to invest in restoring a particular wetland, they could see that some of the benefits might be improvement in water quality, improvement in biodiversity or ecosystems. It could be sequestering carbon to mitigate climate change. So a whole bunch of benefits. So this tool helps companies look at different kinds of nature-based projects and understand what the benefits might be of those projects. The other tool that we put out in December was a collaboration between the global team that I lead and some colleagues of ours in Colombia. And this was building a platform to make it much faster and cheaper to analyze the benefits in an ecosystem or in a basin for a city. So kind of thinking back to those water funds, like what is the business case? What is the actual dollar value of investing in those activities upstream? So this is sort of a first step in development of a water fund, is to understand, will we get a positive return from our investment in the watershed? This tool helps people understand that in their basins. And it's free. This tool is free. Usually this kind of assessment would cost tens of thousands of dollars and would take a few months to do. But by having this tool to make it free and much quicker, we can begin to engage some of those partners and get people on board for this kind of work much more quickly and in a really transparent way by using the online tool. So these are just two examples of the kinds of tools that we create to help advance the work that we're doing to make it more effective. I hope that wasn't too much detail, and happy to answer questions about any of that kind of work and any other work I'm doing. But just wanted to finish off my talk with talking about how you can start to get engaged on freshwater science and explore this topic a bit more. So I think exploration is a really important part of understanding what you want to do in your career and what really excites you and lights you up. And so one of the ways to explore whether freshwater science is something you might be interested in is to read, to talk to people, to watch water-related movies and documentaries. So I listed a few here. I think the first thing you should do, if you don't already know, is find out where your water comes from. I think that's something everyone should know and understand. Is your water supply clean? Are there problems? What are people doing to address those problems in the place where your water comes from? So I think that's really good to do. I listed a number of books and some movies and documentaries, as I mentioned, that I think are particularly useful to understand some of these water issues. And of course, talking with people, talking with professors, teachers, experts, friends. And then finally, taking a class or volunteering. That, as I mentioned, the volunteer work I did right after my undergrad was super important to kind of giving me some insights into what it's like to work in water and some of the challenges that you might face and what you might want to do. So just some suggestions around how to get started thinking about freshwater and freshwater science. And then I just wanted to finish with, I mentioned, I listed a number of freshwater science areas that you could go into, but I wanted to call out some specific areas of need that I think currently and as in the near future, there'll be a continued need for people to have expertise in. So one of those is climate change modeling. How do we reduce that uncertainty? How do we understand what might be expected in the future and plan? So we help us plan for that. This is coupled with the second one, how to deal with uncertainty in planning, because our planning approaches are a little bit old school. And so how do we revise our planning to make sure we can incorporate uncertainty? Water and data technology. So I showed a couple examples of possible technology, but also how do we collect better data cheaper? How do we use, for example, satellites to collect data that's needed to help inform how we manage water? How do we grow our food with less water? Really important so that we can feed a growing population as we move into the next couple of decades. As I mentioned, systems thinking is really important, particularly around how we balance the different needs between food, water supply, energy, and the environment. And then finally, how we integrate different kinds of solutions. In engineering, I was definitely taught about how to consider just built infrastructure, kind of gray infrastructure, dams, levees, pipes, those kinds of things. But the work that I do right now is really focused on natural solutions. So how do we restore our natural systems to deliver what we want on clean water, reliable water? And there's a big need to integrate those two, to figure out how we create models that can integrate both. How do we do financial calculations that integrate both kinds of solutions? So that's something that there's definitely a gap and a need for. All right, so that's my presentation for today. I'm happy to take questions. I'm sorry I didn't leave very much time for that. It went slower than I thought. I talked a little more than I had planned, but hopefully it was useful for everyone. I'll stop sharing my screen, and happy to answer questions now. And I've put my email here. Feel free to email me if you have additional questions that I can answer, or about any areas of freshwater science or the work that we do at the Nature Conservancy. Great, I see the question come up. If I can comment about a day of my professional work. Yes, so happy to do that. I do spend a lot of time sitting in front of the computer, and I spend a lot of time in meetings with my colleagues and with other partners. But I also then spend some time doing science work, which involves like reading academic papers, reading reports, analyzing data, planning new ways that we can address some of these challenges through new science reports, or tools, or other kinds of offerings that help us deliver our strategies. So yeah, it's a combination of interacting with others through email, through meetings, but also then doing some science analysis work, and planning strategies of how we're going to do our work more effectively. Yeah, great. A computer scientist, how can you get into freshwater science? I love that question, because we need more computer scientists getting into this area. I just interacted recently and advised a startup that was looking at how they can create tools, computer science tools, to better track what's happening in our freshwater systems and how to better manage for those. So I think there's a lot of potential for using computer science skills to help address freshwater science challenges. I think, just as I mentioned, some of those ways that you can kind of read up on what the challenges are, and so that you can start to think about like how you might use your computer science expertise to address some of those problems. And as I mentioned, some of the key problems are around data availability and modeling. What are the countries with more water problems? You could see from the maps that I showed some of those countries. And as I mentioned, you can go on to WRI's website, Aqueduct, to look at more specifically at which countries have water stress right now, or expected to have more water stress. But I would say in terms of water scarcity, those countries obviously that receive a lot less precipitation, those that are hotter and don't get as much water. So desert countries, those in the Middle East, but there are also other countries that have really high water quality problems, primarily because of lack of regulation. So I think it depends on the type of water problems you're considering, but it can depend on both biophysical aspects that are causing those problems, and the management side or the social side that can result in problems in different countries. What can we do to take care of the water? Yeah, there's definitely things you can do starting at home. I think understanding what are the particular challenges to water in your area. If you live in an area that's really water scarce, then being really careful with your water use, and using less water, take showers, all those kinds of things. But also buying products, thinking about the things that you eat or other kinds of products and how much water they take to produce. There's a really great online tool for the water footprint of products that you can look at and consider that sort of water footprint of what you eat and use. And in terms of water quality, if you live in a place that you can have maintain or improve vegetation, which helps reduce runoff or pollutants in the landscape, you can go out and help do cleanups of your waterways. There's often events around that. So there's a lot of different ways that you can get engaged, both you and your family, but also get engaged in the community to help address local water challenges. But I think it starts with educating yourself on what those local water challenges are and working on those.
Okay, thanks so much, Kari, for this important topic about water. I think we know and understand a little more the problems that now we have with water, and also what scientific can work in this topic. And also, we expect that this topic the students understand more, and also we expect that also our students stay with us in the following webinars. Thanks so much for your time, and we're closing the webinar now.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure.
Thanks.
All of these discoveries are done by people. It all started when curious young students decided to become scientists. And we need more. We realized this long ago. There is talent and passion for science everywhere. We connect curious students with passionate young scientists. Now we are all together as Science Clubs International. Our common language is STEM. Our mission is to spark a social transformation by expanding access to high-quality STEM education and international scientific networks. We are growing. Empowering youth with science.